Racist cops attack black woman in mall, freeze when they find out she's Secret Service. In this eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking incident of racial profiling that occurred in a bustling shopping mall. A group of police officers, driven by bias and prejudice, confronted a black woman, assuming her guilt without cause. This alarming encounter escalates quickly, highlighting the deep-seated issues of racism that persist in our society today. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
In a bustling urban mall, where the hum of shoppers' chatter blended seamlessly with the background music of nearby stores, Nia Carter moved through the crowd with the effortless grace of someone who had nothing to prove. Dressed in casual yet sharp attire, fitted leather jacket over a dark blouse and jeans, she looked like any other professional taking a much-needed break from a demanding job. What no one around her knew was that Nia wasn't just another shopper. She was an experienced operative in the United States Secret Service, a role that demanded composure, intelligence, and a capacity to assess danger in an instant. Today, however, she wasn't here as an agent. Officially, she was on a rare day off, but like all her days off, the instinct to observe, analyze, and remain alert was ever present. The mall was a sprawling labyrinth of shops, corridors, and escalators, illuminated by bright fluorescent lights that reflected off polished tiles. Nia carried a small black leather bag slung across her shoulder, inside which rested her discreet communication device and a compact data decryption tool. These items weren't there by coincidence. While she wasn't actively working, Nia was always prepared for an unexpected turn of events. Years of service had taught her that quiet days rarely stayed quiet, especially for someone in her line of work. The stakes of her career, national security, counterintelligence, and protecting lives never truly allowed her to let her guard down. Yet today she was trying. For a few hours, she told herself, she would focus on finding the perfect birthday gift for her nephew, an eager 10-year-old fascinated by technology. Nia paused near an electronics store, its bright displays showcasing the latest gadgets and gaming consoles. She stood at the glass window, studying a drone kit that her nephew would undoubtedly love, weighing whether she could find a better deal elsewhere in the mall. As she deliberated, she caught a faint reflection in the glass. 2 uniformed officers, standing about 30 feet away, seemed to have taken an unusual interest in her. She noticed them exchange glances, followed by subtle nods in her direction. To anyone else, their observation might have gone unnoticed, but Nia's training had sharpened her ability to detect even the smallest changes in her surroundings. She acted as if she hadn't noticed, casually stepping away from the window and heading deeper into the mall. The 2 officers were Jason Braden and Eric Tate. Braden, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, had the bearing of someone who thrived on asserting authority. His years in the force had turned his confidence into arrogance, often leading to confrontations with those he deemed out of place. His partner, Tate, was younger, thinner, and clearly less certain of himself. This was his 2nd year on patrol, and he often found himself deferring to Braden's aggressive instincts, unsure of when to speak up. On this particular day, Braden had already complained about the monotony of their shift, grumbling about how their presence in the mall was a waste of time. So when he spotted Nia, a poised black woman moving alone through the busy shopping center, his suspicion flared. "She doesn't look like she's here for shopping," Braden muttered to Tate, who merely shrugged in response. As Nia continued walking, Braden's eyes remained fixed on her, his mind racing with baseless assumptions. She carried herself with an air of confidence that he found unnerving, as though she didn't recognize his authority without even having met him. This irked Braden more than he would admit. To him, her presence seemed calculated, as though she were scoping the area for something. "Let's follow her," he said curtly, motioning for Tate to keep up. Nia, meanwhile, moved with calculated ease, seemingly unbothered but acutely aware of their growing proximity. She didn't need to look back to confirm they were trailing her. She could feel the weight of their stares. Passing through a quieter corridor of the mall, where the shops thinned and foot traffic dwindled, she decided to test their intentions. Pausing briefly, she glanced at her phone, feigning a moment of indecision before turning down a side hallway that led to a service exit. It wasn't the kind of path most shoppers would take, and she knew that if the officers were truly following her, they'd reveal themselves here. Sure enough, Braden and Tate turned the corner shortly after she did, their pace quickening as they closed the distance. "Ma," and Braden called out, his voice cutting through the hum of the ventilation system overhead. Nia stopped, turning slowly to face them, her expression neutral but her muscles instinctively tensing. She had encountered men like Braden before, officers who used their badges as weapons rather than shields, motivated by ego rather than duty. "Yes, officer," she said evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Tate hung back slightly, his uncertainty evident in his body language, while Braden took a step forward, his hand resting lightly on the holster at his side. "What brings you to this part of the mall?" he asked, his tone dripping with unwarranted suspicion. Nia raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize certain areas were restricted," she replied calmly. Her measured response only seemed to fuel Braden's irritation. "This is a service hallway," he said sharply, "not exactly a place most shoppers wander into. What are you doing here?" Nia didn't miss the condescension in his voice, nor the way he stood, attempting to physically impose himself. "I was avoiding the crowd," she said, still calm. "Is that a problem?" Braden's jaw tightened. To him, her confidence bordered on defiance, and he wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone he'd already decided didn't belong. "I'm going to need to see some ID," he said, his voice firm. Nia sighed inwardly. She could feel the situation escalating unnecessarily, and while she wasn't one to back down, she knew better than to let it spiral out of control. Slowly she reached for her bag, her movements deliberate to avoid giving him any excuse to react. But before she could retrieve her identification, Braden stepped closer, his impatience boiling over. "Let me see what's in the bag," he demanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Tate, standing a few feet behind, shifted uncomfortably. "Jason," he began hesitantly. "She hasn't done anything." Braden silenced him with a glare. "Stay out of it, Tate," he snapped before turning his attention back to Nia. "Hand it over." Nia's eyes narrowed slightly. She had dealt with men like Braden before, men who mistook power for strength and control for justice. But this wasn't the time to educate him on his shortcomings. She held out the bag, her expression unreadable. "Be my guest," she said coolly. Braden snatched the bag, rifling through it with unnecessary force. His hand closed around the sleek black device inside a custom-built encryption tool that looked nothing like an ordinary gadget. He held it up, his brows furrowing in suspicion. "What's this?" he demanded. "It's mine," Nia replied simply. "I use it for work." Braden scoffed, turning the device over in his hands. "What kind of work?" he asked, though the sneer in his voice made it clear he wasn't looking for an honest answer. "Are you some kind of hacker?" Nia didn't flinch. "I'm a federal agent," she said, her voice steady. "That device is government property, and you're out of your depth." Braden froze for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. But rather than back down, he doubled down. "A federal agent?" he repeated, his tone mocking. "Prove it." Nia's patience was wearing thin. She took a step forward, her eyes locking with his. "Put the device down," she said, her voice low but commanding. "Now." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Braden's face. Tate, who had been watching the exchange with increasing discomfort, finally spoke up. "Jason, maybe we should call this in," he said, his voice unsteady. But Braden wasn't ready to relinquish control. "Not until I get some answers," he snapped, tightening his grip on the device. Nia's eyes didn't leave his. She could see the storm brewing behind them, the collision of arrogance, insecurity, and fear. And she knew, without a doubt, that the situation was about to get worse. Braden's grip on the device tightened as though holding it gave him the authority he clearly craved. Nia, still calm on the outside but burning with frustration inside, held her ground. The air between them grew heavy with tension, the fluorescent lights above flickering slightly, adding an eerie undertone to the moment. Tate, standing awkwardly a few steps behind, seemed to shrink under the weight of the escalating situation. His indecision was palpable. He clearly didn't agree with Braden's methods but lacked the conviction to intervene. Nia's instincts screamed at her to de-escalate before things spiraled out of control. But Braden's aggressive posture left her limited options. "Jason, let's think this through," Tate said again, this time with a bit more force in his voice. "She hasn't done anything. Maybe we're jumping to conclusions here." Braden whipped around, glaring at his younger partner. "You don't get to call the shots here, rookie," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to make Tate flinch. "This is a protocol check. She's acting suspicious, and I'm doing my job." Nia let out a slow, measured breath. She had seen this dynamic before, an experienced officer throwing his weight around, dragging a hesitant subordinate into a situation they didn't fully understand. It was a power play, one she could predict almost step by step. But that didn't make it any less dangerous. Braden wasn't just projecting authority, he was actively seeking to dominate the situation, and the more she resisted, the harder he would push. "Your job," Nia said, her voice low but steady, "does not include tampering with government equipment. I'm warning you, officer, you are dangerously close to crossing a line you won't be able to walk back from." Her tone cut through the air like a blade, and for a fleeting second, Braden hesitated. But his hesitation quickly turned to defiance, his ego unwilling to back down. "Government equipment," he scoffed, holding up the device. "I don't buy it. What's a federal agent like you doing sneaking around a service hallway? Sounds more like an excuse than a badge." Nia clenched her jaw. She had been patient, understanding even, but her tolerance for this charade was wearing thin. She was a professional, trained to handle far worse situations, but Braden's escalating hostility was a liability not just to her, but to everyone in the vicinity. Before she could respond, however, a distant sound interrupted her thoughts. It was faint at first, a low, rumbling vibration that seemed to pulse through the floor. Nia's sharp instincts immediately kicked in. The sound was too controlled to be random noise. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Her eyes darted to the far end of the hallway, where a set of heavy double doors led to the mall's underground loading docks. Something was happening there, something she couldn't ignore. Braden, oblivious to the shift in her focus, took a step closer. "I'm not letting you walk out of here until you explain exactly what this is and why you have it," he demanded, shaking the device for emphasis. Nia didn't answer. Her attention was locked on the doors, the vibration growing stronger with each passing second. It wasn't just a sound now. It was a sensation, a low hum that resonated in her chest. Whatever was happening beyond those doors wasn't normal mall activity, and it certainly wasn't good. "Officer Braden," she said finally, her tone clipped and urgent, "you need to let me go. Right now. Braden barked a laugh, mistaking her urgency for desperation. Let you go. Not a chance. I'm not done with you. Nia's patience snapped. She took a deliberate step forward, her voice dropping to a cold, commanding tone. Listen to me. You are standing between me and a potential threat that you don't understand. If you continue to obstruct me, I will consider you a liability to this operation. Stand down. For the first time, Braden faltered. There was something in her eyes, an intensity that couldn't be faked, a weight of authority that even he couldn't entirely dismiss. But his ego wouldn't let him fully back down. Instead, he sneered, masking his doubt with bravado. A threat? What kind of threat? You mean that imaginary one you just made up to avoid answering my questions? Before Nia could reply, the double doors at the end of the hallway burst open with a deafening crash. A wave of cold air swept through the corridor, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of heavy boots on concrete. 3 men emerged, their movements deliberate and coordinated. They were dressed in dark tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks, and each carried an automatic weapon. Nia recognized their type immediately: professional criminals, well-funded and highly dangerous. Her suspicions about the strange vibration had just been confirmed. Braden and Tate froze, the color draining from their faces. The situation had just escalated far beyond their pay grade. Braden instinctively reached for his holstered weapon, but Nia moved faster. She grabbed his wrist in a firm grip, her voice sharp and unwavering. Don't! You'll get us all killed. What the hell? Braden started, but Nia cut him off. Stay behind me, she ordered, releasing his wrist and stepping forward. Her movements were precise, controlled, as if she were stepping into a role she was born to play. The men at the other end of the hallway stopped, their weapons raised but not yet firing. They hadn't expected to encounter anyone here, and the sight of a calm, composed Nia facing them seemed to give them pause. One of the men, the apparent leader, stepped forward, his voice muffled but authoritative. You're not supposed to be here, he said, his weapon trained on her. Walk away, and we'll pretend we didn't see you. Nia didn't flinch. Her mind raced, calculating the odds, assessing her options. She could see the tension in their stances, the way their fingers hovered over their triggers. These men weren't bluffing, they were ready to kill without hesitation. But she also saw something else: hesitation, uncertainty. They didn't know who she was or why she was there, and that gave her an edge. I'm not going anywhere, she said evenly, her hands raised slightly to show she was unarmed. But you have a choice. You can turn around and leave, or you can find out exactly how bad of a mistake you just made. The leader hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Behind her, Nia could hear Braden and Tate whispering urgently, their panic barely contained. She didn't need to turn around to know they were both completely out of their depth. Who the hell are you? The leader demanded, his weapon still trained on her. Nia didn't answer. Instead, she reached slowly into her jacket, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She pulled out a small device, a discreet communication tool disguised as an ordinary phone, and pressed a button. A faint beep echoed through the hallway, followed by a burst of static. The leader stiffened, realizing too late what she had done. Call it off, he shouted, his voice rising in panic. But it was already too late. From somewhere beyond the corridor, the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. Reinforcements were coming, Nia's reinforcements. The situation was about to take a dramatic turn, and for the first time, Braden and Tate seemed to grasp the gravity of what was unfolding. Nia didn't move, her gaze locked on the leader as the footsteps drew closer. You had your chance, she said quietly. You should have taken it. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. Nia stood perfectly still, her calm and commanding presence contrasting starkly with the rising tension in the air. The three masked men at the other end of the hallway began to shift uncomfortably, their weapons still raised but now accompanied by a flicker of uncertainty in their movements. The leader, his voice strained with panic, barked orders to his companions, though his words betrayed a growing realization that they had stumbled into something far beyond their control. Behind Nia, Braden and Tate remained frozen, both clearly struggling to process what was happening. Braden's confidence had evaporated entirely, replaced by a palpable fear that he tried and failed to mask with aggression. "What the hell is going on?" he hissed, his voice low and trembling. "Who are these guys? And what did you just do?" Nia didn't turn to acknowledge him. Her focus remained locked on the armed men ahead, her sharp eyes scanning every detail, their stances, their weapons, the way their fingers hovered too close to their triggers. Her years of training had honed her ability to predict behavior in moments like this, and she knew that even the smallest misstep could turn this standoff into a bloodbath. "I told you to stay behind me," Nia said, her tone sharp and unwavering. "Keep your mouth shut, don't make any sudden moves, and let me handle this." Braden bristled at her tone, his pride momentarily overriding his fear. "Handle this? You're the one who escalated." "I said shut up," Nia snapped, cutting him off with such force that he immediately fell silent. For the first time, he saw her not as someone he could intimidate, but as someone who carried an authority he couldn't match, someone who had clearly been in situations far more dangerous than this. The leader of the masked men took a cautious step forward, his weapon still aimed squarely at Nia. "You don't understand what you've just done," he said, his voice shaking slightly beneath his mask. "Whatever signal you just sent, you're not leaving this hallway alive." Nia tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "That's funny," she said coolly, "because I was just about to say the same thing to you." The leader hesitated, his confidence wavering under her unflinching gaze. He glanced back at his companions, silently seeking confirmation of their readiness, but even they seemed to hesitate. The footsteps grew louder now, accompanied by the unmistakable metallic clink of tactical gear. Nia's reinforcements were closing in, and the tension in the hallway reached a breaking point. One of the masked men, clearly younger and less experienced than the others, suddenly shifted his stance, his finger brushing the trigger of his weapon. The motion didn't escape Nia's notice, and she reacted instantly. In one fluid motion, she lunged to the side, her body moving with the precision of a seasoned operative. The first burst of gunfire ripped through the space she had just occupied, the deafening sound reverberating through the corridor and sending shockwaves through everyone present. Nia hit the ground in a controlled roll, using the momentum to push herself back onto her feet. Her movements were impossibly fast, a blur of action that left even the trained criminals momentarily stunned. She darted toward a steel support beam that jutted out from the wall, using it as cover while she assessed her next move. The gunfire ceased for a moment, the masked men recalibrating their aim, but the brief lull was all Nia needed. From her position behind the beam, Nia reached into her jacket and retrieved a compact smoke canister. With practiced ease, she activated it and rolled it toward the center of the hallway. A hiss of pressurized gas filled the air, followed by a thick plume of gray smoke that rapidly obscured the space. The masked men cursed loudly, their vision now compromised, as Nia moved like a shadow through the chaos. Braden and Tate, still rooted in place, coughed violently as the smoke enveloped them. "What the hell is happening?" Tate gasped, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "We need to get out of here." "Stay where you are," Nia barked, her voice cutting through the haze with absolute authority. "Move, and you'll get yourself killed." Braden, however, was not so easily convinced. Fueled by panic and a desperate need to regain control, he fumbled for his sidearm, drawing it with shaking hands. "I'm not just standing here while she plays hero," he spat, his voice tinged with both fear and defiance. Before he could take aim, a shadow moved through the smoke, a blur of motion that ended with Nia's hand clamping down on his wrist. She twisted sharply, forcing him to drop the weapon with a yelp of pain. "You'll thank me later," she said coldly, kicking the gun out of reach before disappearing back into the smoke. The masked men were now firing blindly, their bullets ricocheting off the walls and floor in deafening bursts. Nia used the confusion to her advantage, moving silently and methodically through the dense cloud. She closed in on the first man, her footsteps inaudible beneath the chaos. With surgical precision, she struck, delivering a sharp blow to the side of his neck that sent him crumpling to the ground. His weapon clattered against the tile, and Nia quickly kicked it away before turning her attention to the remaining two. The leader, realizing they were losing control of the situation, shouted something incomprehensible to his remaining companion. The second man nodded and moved to flank Nia's position, his weapon raised and ready. But Nia anticipated the maneuver. As he moved through the smoke, she intercepted him, her movements a seamless blend of offense and defense. He swung the butt of his rifle at her, but she ducked low, sweeping his legs out from under him with a single fluid motion. He hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him, and before he could recover, Nia disarmed him with a swift kick to his hand. Only the leader remained now, his panic evident in the way his breathing quickened. He fired wildly into the smoke, each shot growing more erratic as the sound of approaching reinforcements grew closer. Nia emerged from the haze like a ghost, her silhouette cutting through the chaos. He spun toward her, his weapon raised, but she was faster. In a blur of motion, she closed the distance between them, her hand striking the barrel of his gun and knocking it aside just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, embedding itself harmlessly in the wall, and before he could recover, Nia delivered a sharp elbow to his jaw that sent him stumbling backward. The leader hit the ground hard, his weapon skidding across the floor. He groaned in pain, his mask slightly askew, revealing a hint of his face beneath. Nia stood over him, her breathing steady despite the exertion. "You had your chance to walk away," she said, her voice low and cold. "Now you'll answer for this." Before the leader could respond, the corridor was flooded with light as Nia's reinforcements finally arrived. A team of heavily armed agents in tactical gear stormed the hallway, their weapons trained on the remaining threats. The smoke began to dissipate, revealing the scene in full, two masked men unconscious, their weapons scattered, and Nia standing victorious over the third. Braden and Tate, still coughing and disoriented, stared at the scene in stunned silence. For Braden, the reality of what had just transpired was almost impossible to process. The woman he had dismissed as suspicious had just single-handedly neutralized a group of armed criminals while protecting their lives in the process. His pride and ego, once towering, now lay in ruins at his feet. Tate, on the other hand, seemed to grasp the gravity of what had happened. His wide eyes darted between Nia and the agents now securing the area, his mind racing to reconcile the events of the past few minutes. Who are you?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Nia didn't answer immediately. She turned to face the agents, giving them a quick series of hand signals that sent them into action, securing the unconscious men and sweeping the area for additional threats. Only then did she turn her attention back to the two officers. Her expression was unreadable, her piercing gaze cutting through them like a blade. "I told you," she said simply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm someone you don't want to mess with." The air in the corridor was thick with tension, even as the smoke from Nia's tactical maneuver began to clear. The reinforced lighting from the tactical team illuminated the chaos left in her wake. Unconscious bodies of armed criminals sprawled across the floor, their weapons scattered beyond reach, and the two police officers standing frozen in shock. Nia barely spared a glance at the scene. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating the next move, assessing the danger that still lingered despite the apparent resolution of the immediate threat. She knew better than to assume this was over. It never was. The leader of the masked men groaned as he struggled to sit up, blood dripping from his nose where Nia's elbow had landed moments before. His mask had been knocked aside, revealing a scarred face and piercing grey eyes, filled with a venomous mix of anger and fear. One of Nia's tactical agents knelt to restrain him, pulling his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. The man's defiance didn't waver, even as his hands were cuffed tightly. "You don't know what you're doing," he spat, glaring up at Nia. "You're making a mistake bigger than you can imagine." Nia crouched down to his level, her face inches from his. Her expression was ice cold, her gaze unrelenting. "You're in no position to talk about mistakes," she said, her voice low and sharp enough to cut through steel. "Who are you working for? What was your objective here?" The man let out a dry, humorless laugh, his bloodied lips curling into a sneer. "You think this is about us? You're already too late." This little show? It was just the beginning. Nia's jaw tightened, but her composure didn't falter. She stood, nodding at the agent restraining him. "Get him out of here," she ordered. "Secure the others. I want a full sweep of the area, check for devices, traps, anything they might have left behind." The agents moved with military precision, dragging the restrained criminals out of the corridor and into custody. Nia turned her attention back to the two officers, who had yet to move or speak since the tactical team's arrival. Tate's wide eyes were filled with a mix of awe and confusion, while Braden's face was flushed with humiliation and barely suppressed anger. He opened his mouth to speak, but Nia held up a hand, silencing him before he could make the situation worse. "You too," she said, her tone clipped and professional, "need to leave this area immediately. This is now a federal matter, and you're out of your depth." Braden bristled, his fists clenching at his sides. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he snapped, his voice shaking with a mix of defiance and embarrassment. "I'm still the law here, and I deserve to know what the hell is going on." Nia's eyes narrowed, her patience with him wearing dangerously thin. "The law," she repeated, her voice laced with icy disdain. "The law would have gotten you killed if I hadn't been here. You had no idea what you were walking into, and your ignorance nearly cost lives, mine included." Tate flinched at her words, his guilt written all over his face. He glanced at Braden, who was clearly too consumed by pride to see the truth of what she was saying. "Maybe we should just go, Jason," Tate said quietly, his voice tentative. "This isn't our fight anymore." Braden shot him a furious look, but before he could argue, one of the tactical agents approached Nia with a grim expression. "We found something," the agent said, holding out a small, black cylindrical device. It was no larger than a soda can, but the sleek, unmarked design made it clear it wasn't something you'd find in a department store. Nia's stomach tightened at the sight of it. She recognized the design immediately: military-grade, encrypted, and dangerous. "What is it?" Tate asked, stepping closer despite himself. Nia didn't answer right away. She took the device from the agent, turning it over in her hands as she inspected it. The weight, the subtle markings along the edges, the faint hum of energy emanating from within it all pointed to one thing: It wasn't just a weapon or a tracking device. It was a signal amplifier capable of broadcasting encrypted data across long distances. Her mind raced as she pieced it together. The criminals weren't here for a simple robbery or a random act of violence. This was deliberate, coordinated. They were trying to transmit something, and if the device was still active, it meant they hadn't finished. "Secure this immediately," Nia said, handing the device back to the agent. "We need to isolate the signal and trace its destination. If there's any chance it's still transmitting, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." The agent nodded and hurried off, leaving Nia to confront the sinking realization that this wasn't over. Whatever they had intercepted here was just a piece of a much larger puzzle, and the clock was ticking. Braden, still seething, refused to back down. "You're not telling us everything," he accused, stepping forward as though trying to reclaim some semblance of authority. "You know exactly what's going on, and you're keeping us in the dark." Nia turned to him slowly, her gaze colder than ever. "You're right," she said bluntly. "I'm not telling you everything. Because you don't need to know. What you need to do is get out of my way and let me do my job. Or do you want to add obstruction of justice to your growing list of failures today?" Her words landed like a slap, and for once, Braden seemed to have no response. He took a step back, his face dark with barely contained rage, but he didn't push the issue further. Tate, meanwhile, looked as though he wanted to disappear entirely. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Nia and his partner before finally speaking up. Is there anything we can do to help?" he asked hesitantly. Nia regarded him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. Unlike Braden, Tate wasn't driven by ego or prejudice. His question was genuine, and despite his earlier hesitation, he seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Stay out of the way," Nia said finally, her tone less harsh. "That's the best thing you can do right now." Tate nodded, though he still looked conflicted. He reached out to touch Braden's arm, silently urging him to step back, and after a tense moment, Braden reluctantly followed. The two officers moved to the edge of the corridor, leaving Nia and her team to handle the rest. As the tactical team continued their sweep, Nia's mind raced with possibilities. The device was too sophisticated to be a one-off. It was part of something bigger, and if they had intercepted it here, it meant someone out there was waiting for the signal to go through. She couldn't let that happen. Not on her watch. One of the agents approached her again, this time holding a tablet connected to the intercepted device. "We've isolated the signal," he said. "It's encrypted, but we managed to trace its destination. It's not local." Nia's chest tightened. "How far?" she asked. The agent hesitated, his expression grim. "It's bouncing through multiple relays, but the origin point, it's offshore. Whoever set this up didn't plan for it to be traced." "Can you shut it down?" Nia asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Not without risking a detonation," the agent admitted. "The device is rigged to self-destruct if we tamper with it directly." Nia cursed under her breath. This was worse than she thought. The criminals weren't just transmitting data, they were sending it to an international source. If the signal went through, it could compromise national security on a scale she wasn't prepared to contemplate. She turned to the team, her voice firm. "We need to contain this signal. Block it, disrupt it, whatever it takes. But we can't let it reach its destination." The agent sprang into action, working with military precision to implement her orders. Nia remained in the center of the chaos, her mind racing as she calculated the next steps. This wasn't just about stopping the criminals who had been captured. It was about cutting off their operation at the root. And she knew, deep down, that whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. For now, though, Nia had the upper hand. But she also knew the clock was ticking, and time, as always, was not on her side. The corridor had transformed into a hub of activity, with Nia's tactical team working swiftly to neutralize the immediate threat posed by the device and secure the captured criminals. The glow of portable monitors and the constant hum of encrypted communications filled the space, blending with the harsh fluorescent lights. Yet amidst the controlled chaos, Nia remained a pillar of focus, her sharp eyes darting between her team and the shadowy edges of the hallway. Every instinct she had told her that the danger wasn't over. The criminals may have been subdued, but their objective, whatever it was, remained unresolved. And that made this situation far from secure. The tactical agent monitoring the encrypted signal, a young man named Reynolds, looked up from his tablet, his face pale. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight, the signals shifting. "They're rerouting it through a secondary node. It's picking up speed." Nia's jaw clenched as she moved to his side, her gaze locking onto the lines of code cascading across the screen. The device wasn't just a transmitter, it was adaptive, programmed to react to interference. Whoever had designed this had accounted for contingencies, and now they were accelerating their efforts. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her tone clipped. Reynolds hesitated, tapping a few commands into the tablet. "If we don't block it within the next 3 minutes, the signal will reach the offshore relay. Once it's there, we'll lose all control. We won't even be able to trace it." Nia's mind raced. She knew the stakes better than anyone. If the signal went through, it could compromise classified information, jeopardize national security, or worse, initiate a chain of events that would have catastrophic consequences. Yet the tools at her disposal were limited. The device was rigged to self-destruct if tampered with directly, and the clock was ticking. "Set up a localized EMP," she ordered, her voice firm. "We'll disrupt the signal manually. It's a risk, but it's the only way to ensure this stops here." Reynolds nodded, already moving to execute her command. The team sprang into action, retrieving the portable EMP generator from their equipment cases. The device wasn't perfect. Deploying it would likely disable all electronics in the immediate vicinity, including their own, but it was a calculated risk Nia was willing to take. Lives could be rebuilt, systems restored. But the fallout from allowing that signal to reach its destination would be irreversible. As her team worked, Nia turned her attention back to the two officers lingering at the edge of the corridor. Tate still looked uncertain, his wide eyes darting between the agents and the criminals being escorted out. Braden, on the other hand, had crossed his arms tightly over his chest, his face a mask of barely suppressed rage. He hadn't said a word since their last exchange, but his silence was anything but a concession. It was the silence of a man whose ego had been bruised, whose authority had been challenged, and who was desperate to reassert himself. "Stay out of the way," Nia said sharply as she approached them, her words directed more at Braden than Tate. "This is beyond your jurisdiction and your expertise. Don't make this harder than it already is." Braden's eyes narrowed, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You think you're the only one who knows what's going on here," he snapped, his voice low but charged with venom. "You've been running this show like we don't exist, like we're just some kind of obstacle. But we're still cops, and this is still our turf." Nia's patience, already stretched thin, snapped. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto his with the intensity of a steel blade. "Your turf," she repeated, her voice a dangerous whisper. "If this were about your turf, you'd be filling out incident reports right now while your department cleaned up the mess you made. But this isn't about you. This is about national security. And if you can't recognize that, Then you're not just an obstacle, you're a liability. Braden flinched, but he didn't back down. His pride wouldn't let him. Liability, he said, his tone mocking. You think you can just waltz in here and call the shots? You don't even. Before he could finish, the sound of gunfire erupted from the far end of the corridor. The crack of bullets against concrete echoed through the hallway, followed by the shouts of tactical agents scrambling to respond. Nia's body moved instinctively, dropping into a low stance as she scanned the area for the source of the attack. Contact. One of the agents shouted, his voice sharp and urgent, multiple hostiles moving in from the west entrance. Nia's stomach dropped. She had known this wasn't over, but the speed and precision of the counterattack were unexpected. The captured criminals had been a diversion, a calculated ploy to distract her team while reinforcements closed in. And now, the real threat had arrived. The corridor erupted into chaos as more gunfire tore through the air. Nia drew her sidearm, her movements fluid and precise as she took cover behind a steel support beam. Positions, she barked, her voice cutting through the noise. Hold the line. Don't let them reach the device. Her agents moved with practiced efficiency, returning fire as they formed a defensive perimeter around the EMP generator. The criminals were well armed and well trained, their movements coordinated as they advanced through the narrow hallway. Whoever they weren't amateurs. This was a professional operation, and they were playing for keeps. Braden and Tate, caught in the crossfire, scrambled for cover. Tate's face was pale, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his radio. "We need backup," he stammered, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. Backup won't get here in time." Nia snapped, her focus never wavering. "If you want to be useful, stay out of the way and don't do anything stupid." Tate nodded, his fear evident but his compliance immediate. Braden, however, wasn't so easily cowed. Fueled by a toxic mix of fear and anger, he drew his weapon and moved to join the fray. "I'm not just standing here while you call the shots," he growled, his eyes blazing with defiance. Nia didn't have time to argue. She focused on the advancing hostiles, her shots precise as she aimed to neutralize the threat. The hallway became a battlefield, the sound of gunfire and shouted commands blending into a cacophony of violence. Her tactical team held their ground, their training and coordination keeping the attackers at bay. But the enemy wasn't retreating. If anything, they were gaining momentum, their numbers greater than anticipated. One of the hostiles lobbed a flashbang grenade into the corridor, the device landing mere feet from Nia's position. She reacted instantly, shielding her eyes as the grenade detonated with a deafening bang and a blinding flash of light. The disorientation was brief, but it was enough to give the attackers an opening. They surged forward, their weapons trained on the EMP generator. Nia gritted her teeth, her mind racing. They couldn't afford to lose the generator. If the attackers reached it, everything would be lost, the signal would go through, and the consequences would be catastrophic. She pushed herself to her feet, her vision still slightly blurred from the flashbang, and moved toward the generator with determined urgency. Braden, to her surprise, was already there. Despite his recklessness, he had positioned himself between the generator and the advancing hostiles, his weapon raised and his stance firm. For the first time, Nia saw something other than arrogance in his expression. There was fear, yes, but also a flicker of resolve, a determination to do something right, even if it meant risking his life. "Stay down," he shouted, firing at the attackers with a surprising level of accuracy. "I've got this." Nia hesitated for only a moment before moving to his side, her own weapon joining his in the fight. "Don't get cocky," she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. "This isn't over yet." Together they held the line, their combined efforts buying the tactical team enough time to finish setting up the EMP. The generator hummed to life, its energy building as it prepared to unleash the pulse that would neutralize the signal and everything else in the vicinity. EMP's ready. Reynolds shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. On your mark. Nia nodded, her focus laser sharp as she scanned the battlefield. The attackers were faltering, their momentum slowing as they realized they were outmatched. But they weren't retreating. Not yet. Do it, Nia ordered, her voice steady. The EMP detonated, releasing a burst of energy that rippled through the corridor like a shockwave. The lights flickered and died, plunging the hallway into darkness as every electronic device within range was rendered useless. The gunfire ceased, the sudden silence almost deafening in its intensity. As the dust settled, Nia stood in the middle of the corridor, her breathing heavy but controlled. The attackers were down, their weapons useless and their movements sluggish. Her tactical team moved swiftly to secure them, their efficiency unwavering even in the aftermath of the chaos. Braden lowered his weapon, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. For the first time he looked at Nia not with defiance, but with something closer to respect. He didn't say anything, and neither did she. There would be time for words later. For now, the battle was over, but the war was far from won. The aftermath of the EMP pulse left the corridor eerily quiet. The sharp hum of the device powering down faded into nothingness, and the once chaotic scene was now bathed in dim emergency lighting, casting long shadows against the walls. Smoke from gunfire and the residue of the flashbang lingered in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of scorched electronics. Nia stood still for a moment, her breathing steady despite the pounding of her heart. Around her, the tactical team moved swiftly, rounding up the disarmed attackers who were too stunned or injured to resist further. The pulse had neutralized all active electronics, including the criminals' weapons and communication devices, leaving them powerless in every sense of the word. Nia's gaze swept the hallway, taking in every detail: the overturned equipment, the fallen hostiles, the tactical agents methodically securing the area. It wasn't victory she felt, though. Not yet. Her focus shifted to the small, black signal transmitter, now lying inert in the hands of her lead technician, Reynolds. Even disabled, it still felt like a ticking time bomb. She approached him, her footsteps quiet but purposeful. "Status?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the lingering tension. Reynolds glanced up, his face pale but composed. The EMP neutralized the device. Signal transmission has been completely disrupted. Whatever they were sending, it didn't get through. He paused, holding up the device carefully, as though it might still bite. But this thing, it's not just a transmitter. It's got layers of encryption we haven't even begun to crack. It's carrying something they were desperate to send. Nia frowned, her mind racing. Desperate was an understatement. The lengths these attackers had gone to their precision, their willingness to die for their mission, meant this wasn't just a test run or a simple operation. Whatever data was locked inside that device wasn't just important, it was critical. "Can we extract it?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Reynolds hesitated, shaking his head. "Not here. The EMP fried most of our portable decryption tools. We'll need a secure facility and a specialized team to even begin breaking into this thing. And there's no guarantee it won't self-destruct the moment we try." Nia clenched her jaw, her frustration tempered by her discipline. She wasn't used to leaving loose ends, but in this case, she had no choice. The device had been neutralized for now, and it was out of enemy hands. That would have to be enough, at least until her team could analyze it in a secure environment. Behind her, the sound of groaning drew her attention. She turned to see the leader of the attackers being dragged to his feet by two tactical agents. His mask had been removed entirely, revealing a face lined with scars and a mouth twisted into a defiant sneer. Despite his disheveled appearance, his eyes burned with hatred, and his body radiated an unnerving confidence, even in defeat. Nia walked toward him, her steps deliberate, her expression unreadable. She stopped just a few feet away, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "You want to tell me what was so important that you were willing to die for it?" she asked, her tone cold and measured. The man's sneer widened into a grin, his teeth stained with blood. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice raspy but filled with venom. "This was just the first move. You stopped a transmission, but the information's already out there. You're too late, Agent." Nia didn't flinch, though his words sent a chill down her spine. She had seen this kind of resolve before, fanaticism driven by a cause so deeply ingrained that even capture or death wouldn't extinguish it. People like him didn't bluff. They didn't need to. "What information?" she pressed, her voice hardening. "Who's behind this?" The man chuckled, the sound dry and hollow. "You'll find out soon enough. Or maybe you won't. Either way, it doesn't matter. You're playing catch-up, just like you always do." Nia's patience wore thin. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I've seen men like you break in less time than it takes to say the word lawyer. You think you're untouchable, but I promise you, you're not. Talk now, and maybe you'll still have something to bargain with when this is over." The man didn't reply, his grin remaining fixed in place. Nia stared at him for a moment longer before signaling to the agents holding him. "Get him out of here," she ordered. "Interrogate him off-site. I want every detail, every connection, every lead he's got. And I don't care how long it takes." The agents nodded and hauled the man away, his mocking laughter echoing faintly as he was dragged down the corridor. Nia watched them go, her fists clenched at her sides. She knew his confidence wasn't empty bravado. There was more to this than a single transmission, and the implications gnawed at her. Behind her, Braden finally found his voice. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his tone a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're just going to let him go? After everything he just said?" Nia turned to face him, her expression as cold as steel. "He's not going anywhere," she said. "He'll be in custody before he even has a chance to breathe fresh air. But unlike you, I know how to play the long game. He'll talk when he's ready, and when he realizes he's got no other options." Braden's face twisted in frustration. "You don't get it, do you? He basically told you there's more going on, and you're just standing here like it's all under control." Nia took a step toward him, her presence towering despite her smaller frame. "You don't get it," she said sharply. "This isn't your world. You don't understand what it takes to fight threats like this. If you'd gotten your way, we'd all be dead, and that device would be halfway across the world by now. So unless you want to add to the body count, stay out of my way." Tate, who had been silent during the exchange, stepped forward hesitantly. What do we do now?" he asked, his voice quiet but sincere. Nia's gaze softened slightly as she looked at him. Unlike Braden, Tate wasn't blinded by ego. He was scared. Yes, but he was trying to understand, trying to help. "You go back to your precinct," she said, her tone firm but less harsh. "File reports. Let your superiors know what happened, and let us handle the rest. This isn't over, but it's not your fight anymore." Tate nodded, though he still looked unsure. Braden, however, wasn't ready to back down. His pride had been battered too severely, and he couldn't let it go. "You think you're some kind of hero," he spat, "but you're just like the rest of us, making it up as you go. hoping it doesn't all fall apart. Nia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she turned away, dismissing him with a single gesture. "Get out of my sight," she said coldly, "before you embarrass yourself any further." As the two officers retreated, Braden muttering curses under his breath, Nia turned her attention back to her team. The corridor was nearly clear now, the captured criminals and their equipment being transported to secure locations for further investigation. The tactical agents moved with quiet efficiency, their professionalism unwavering even after the intensity of the operation. Reynolds approached her again, his expression grim. "We've got everything secured," he said. "But if what that guy said is true—" "I know," Nia interrupted, her voice heavy with resolve. "This is just the beginning." She looked down at the inert transmitter in Reynolds' hands, its sleek, black surface now a symbol of everything they didn't yet understand. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. The enemy wasn't just a group of armed criminals, it was a network, a shadowy force operating on a scale far greater than what they had faced today. And that meant the fight was far from over. For now, though, they had bought themselves time. Time to regroup, to analyze, to prepare. And as Nia stood amidst the wreckage of the corridor, her mind already racing ahead to the battles yet to come, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever this was, whoever was behind it, they wouldn't stop. But neither would she. The mall was eerily quiet now, the chaos of the earlier confrontation replaced by the faint hum of emergency lighting and the murmurs of a few remaining tactical agents. Nia stood in the corridor, the faint smell of gunpowder and scorched electronics still lingering in the air. Her gaze was fixed on the remnants of the operation, the scattered debris, the restrained criminals being escorted out, and the inert signal transmitter now locked securely in a reinforced case. Though the immediate threat had been neutralized, she couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business. This wasn't over. It never was. Reynolds approached her cautiously, holding a tablet that displayed the last traces of the intercepted signal. The EMP had disrupted it before it could reach its destination, but the faint lines of code left behind told a story Nia wasn't yet able to piece together. "We've isolated fragments of the data," Reynolds said, his tone professional but weighted with unease. "It's encrypted beyond anything I've seen before, but the architecture suggests something big military grade, possibly involving external intelligence networks." Nia nodded, her expression unreadable as she studied the screen. She wasn't surprised. The sophistication of the attack, the precision of the operatives, and the sheer desperation to get the signal through all pointed to something far beyond a rogue operation. This was coordinated, deliberate, and likely part of a larger plan. "Secure everything," she said. "The device, the fragments, the operatives. Make sure nothing slips through the cracks. And keep this out of any standard channels. Until we know exactly what we're dealing with, no one outside this team gets a word." Reynolds nodded, already moving to execute her orders. Nia turned her attention to the corridor's entrance, where Braden and Tate lingered, their presence like an irritating shadow. Braden, still nursing his bruised ego, leaned against the wall with crossed arms, his scowl deepening every time he glanced in her direction. Tate, on the other hand, stood awkwardly, his wide eyes darting between Nia and the tactical agents, as though trying to process everything he'd witnessed. With a sigh, Nia approached them, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty space. "You're still here," she said, her tone flat and unimpressed. Braden straightened, his jaw tightening. "Damn right we're still here," he snapped. "We deserve answers." Nia raised an eyebrow, her patience for his attitude nearly depleted. "You don't deserve anything," she said coolly. "You were in over your head the moment you decided to play hero in a situation you didn't understand. If you're looking for someone to pat you on the back, it won't be me." Tate flinched at her words, but Braden's scowl deepened. "I don't need your approval," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "But I've been a cop long enough to know when someone's hiding something. Whatever was in that device, it's bigger than you're letting on. And you don't have the monopoly on dealing with bad guys." Nia stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "Let me make something clear," she said, her voice low and sharp. "The only reason you're still standing here and not in a body bag is because I was here to clean up the mess you almost made. You think you're entitled to answers? Fine. Here's one. This is bigger than your jurisdiction, your experience, and your understanding. If you want to be useful, go back to your precinct and learn how to spot real threats before they're breathing down your neck." Braden opened his mouth to argue, but Tate finally spoke up, his voice hesitant but firm. "She's right, Jason," he said quietly. "We weren't ready for this. We didn't know what we were walking into. And if she hadn't been here—" He trailed off, the weight of the unspoken words hanging heavily between them. Braden glared at him, his pride warring with the truth he didn't want to acknowledge. After a long, tense moment, he shook his head and turned away, muttering something under his breath as he stalked toward the exit. Tate hesitated, glancing at Nia one last time. "Thank you," he said simply before following his partner. As they disappeared down the corridor, Nia exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. She didn't relish humiliating anyone, but Braden's arrogance had nearly cost lives, and she couldn't afford to let that slide. Still, she hoped Tate would take something valuable from this experience. He had potential, even if he was still learning to navigate the complexities of his role. Turning her attention back to her team, Nia joined Reynolds, who was overseeing the transportation of the transmitter and the captured operatives. The leader of the attackers was still smirking, even as he was loaded into a secure transport vehicle. His confidence was unnerving, a silent reminder that the fight was far from over. "We'll have the device analyzed at HQ," Reynolds said, his voice breaking the silence. "But if what he said is true about the data already being out there, we might be dealing with a much bigger problem." "We are," Nia said, her tone grim but resolute. "This wasn't just an isolated operation. It's part of something larger. A network, a plan, maybe even a test. Whatever it is, we'll find it, and we'll stop it." Reynolds nodded, but his unease was clear. The weight of what they had intercepted and what they hadn't there was heavy on everyone. Nia felt it too, though she wouldn't let it show. She had spent years in this line of work, confronting threats that most people couldn't even imagine. The stakes were always high, the consequences always dire, but she had never let that stop her before, and she wouldn't now. As the last of the equipment and operatives were secured, Nia allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. The day had been chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous, but it had also been a reminder of why she did this work. Every mission, every confrontation, every risk, it was all part of a larger fight. A fight to protect not just the country, but the people who lived in it, even when they didn't know or appreciate the sacrifices being made. She glanced at the entrance to the mall, where the faint glow of sunrise was beginning to creep through the glass doors. The night was over, but the battle was just beginning. With one last look at the secured transmitter, she turned and walked toward the exit, her steps steady and her resolve unshaken. The war wasn't over, but she was ready.